Welcome back to Blue Jays Express. José Berríos is out. Dylan Cease has officially stepped into Toronto as the new unquestioned ace. And with that one single move, the Blue Jays triggered the biggest roster chain reaction of their offseason. What happens when you commit $210 million to a pitcher who instantly takes the #1 role? You force a structural shift that rearranges the entire rotation. And someone had to be pushed out. Today, that someone is José Berríos. And in the next minutes, I'm going to break down why the Blue Jays made this decision, why the timing matters, and which two $200 million stars Toronto is preparing to chase. But I won't waste a second of your time. Before we continue, hit like to support the channel, subscribe, and go Blue Jays. The story actually doesn't begin with Berios leaving. It begins the moment Toronto decided to go all in on Cease. You don't pay $210 million for another arm. You pay that amount because you are rewriting your organization's direction. You pay it because you believe your rotation needs a new identity, a new voice, a new engine. And when Cease officially signed, that identity became crystal clear. Power pitching, high strikeout profiles, long-term upside, and financial flexibility to aggressively shape the roster around him. But here's the catch. You cannot build that identity while keeping the old version intact. The Blue Jays were carrying too much money in too many similar roles. Berríos, talented, respected, a veteran who has delivered big moments, became the contract that no longer aligned with where Toronto wanted to go. His $131 million deal made sense when the rotation needed stability. But once Cease arrived, stability wasn't the priority anymore. Upside was, velocity was, dominance was, and above all, financial maneuverability was. And that maneuverability simply didn't exist with Berios on the payroll. This is why insiders weren't surprised when Forbes reported that Toronto could cut ties with Berios after the Cease signing. That wasn't a rumor. That was an early warning signal. Because the second you commit long-term to a $210 million ace, you have to reshape everything underneath him. And when you already have Kevin Gausman earning big money and young arms pushing their way up the ladder, something had to give. Toronto couldn't afford 3 heavy salaries clogging the same tier of the rotation. But there's another layer to this, and it's the piece casual fans usually miss. The Blue Jays don't just want to compete, they want to accelerate. They want to shorten the rebuild window. They want to win now, not in 2 or 3 years. And when an organization decides to fast-track success, they start looking for pieces that come in ready, pieces that elevate the ceiling, pieces that change the team's temperature the moment they walk in the clubhouse. That kind of shift requires money, a lot of it. And you can't unlock that kind of money unless a contract like Berrios' comes off the books. Tell me in the comments, do you think moving on from Berios was the right call? Now, with Berios out of the picture, Toronto suddenly finds themselves in a unique position. They have room to spend, room to maneuver, and room to attack the market in a way fans haven't seen in years. But before revealing the names, which we'll get to in a moment, it's important to understand what type of players the Blue Jays are now prioritizing. First, they want a pitcher who fits the new Cease-led identity, explosive stuff, high strikeout potential, and several years of prime ahead. Someone who can become part of a long-term core rather than a short-term patch. That eliminates almost every mid-tier arm on the market. Second, they want a pitcher who brings postseason experience, someone who can shoulder pressure, stabilize a rotation in October, and give Toronto something they haven't consistently had since the peak Marcus Stroman era, a lefty or righty who opponents genuinely fear. Third, the front office is intentionally targeting pitchers whose value is projected to rise in the next 3 to 5 years, not fall. That tells us the Blue Jays are making decisions with 2026 and 2027 in mind, not just opening day next season. When you combine those 3 requirements, youth and upside, postseason credibility, and long-term growth, only a handful of players in the global pitching market fit the profile. And it's no accident that the 2 players Toronto is preparing to target match these criteria almost perfectly. The first is the one scouts have been buzzing about for months, a pitcher whose numbers overseas have MLB front offices circling his file. A breakout star, a dominant ERA under 2.00, a pitcher entering his prime with elite command and electric velocity. Yes, that's Tatsuya Imai. projected to land a deal between $80 and $110 million. Toronto has watched him carefully, and with Berios gone, they can finally afford to pursue him seriously. The second is almost the opposite profile: a proven veteran, a playoff arm, a lefty with resilience and bite, a competitor who thrives under pressure, a pitcher whose market sits between $90 and $120 million, and whose presence would give Toronto one of the most balanced rotations in baseball. That pitcher is Joaquin Framber Valdez. Together, you're looking at a $200 million two-strike move that transforms the Blue Jays from a team with questions into a team with expectations. Here's the bottom line: Berios leaving wasn't a step back. It was the doorway to something much bigger. Cease didn't just arrive, he set Toronto on an entirely new trajectory. Stay locked in. The moment Toronto makes their next move, I'll be here the second it breaks. And if you haven't yet, subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next.